Hi there, I'm Cassandra Parkin. I'm the East Riding of Yorkshire's Poet Laureate, and this is a short tutorial in about 9 sections, I think, about how to write a poem. So poetry is probably the oldest art form that we have. We were probably writing poems before we even had writing. In fact, there's lots of cultures all around the world that have poetry but don't have writing. It's a way of preserving and sharing ideas and meaning, and it's meant for performance, although these days we tend to think of it as a thing that comes in books. It really is, it's meant to be performed and shared that way. There's probably like a million different definitions of what makes a poem, but the one that I like is that it's an invitation to pause and take notice. And the thing you want your audience to take notice of, it can be like really, really small, like, I ate the plums at the icebox, or it can be something really immense and sprawling, like, let me spend 15,000 lines describing every minute detail of how the Greeks showed up on the Trojan beaches and then blew Troy up and it all went horribly wrong. But that's what it is. It's an invitation to stop and think about something that the poet wants you to think about. So the question I often get asked is, does it have to rhyme? No, it doesn't. It absolutely can. Rhyme's a great tool, but you don't have to make it rhyme if you don't want to. You don't have to use any particular linguistic tricks. There's lots of things that you can play with, like rhythm and assonance and imagery and metaphor and all those things, but you don't have to think, right, this now has to have 6 metaphors and then it's a poem. It doesn't work like that at all. Doesn't have to follow any specific form. Again, there are absolutely loads, but it doesn't have to fit into any one of them, so you don't have to write a sonnet or a limerick or a villanelle or anything like that. It can just be whatever you would like it to be. It's a very messy form, and it does bleed out into all the other art forms that there are. So poetry can also sort of ooze into drama, it can ooze into prose, music, visual art, stand-up comedy. Basically, wherever you look, there will be kind of elements of poetry in the scene, which is good because it means that there aren't any rules. There are only tools available for you to use, and you can absolutely do this too. If you already know what you want your poem to be about, then that's great, and you should absolutely work on that. If you don't have something in mind and you just want to sort of have a go at writing a poem, then a prompt is a great way to get started. The one thing to remember is that a prompt is always there to start you off. It's never there to hold you back. They're strictly a jumping off point for wherever your journey takes you. So if somebody gives you a prompt, so if I was going to say, right, we're going to write about a sunny day, and what comes to mind for you is a rainy night, or a rainy day, or a weekend in Margate, or a trip to the moon, or the mating habits of weevils, or whatever it happens to be, that's okay. That's what you should write about. Don't ever feel that because you haven't stuck strictly to the prompt that you failed, because you haven't. The point of the prompt is to just get your creative process started. And you should absolutely write whatever it is that comes to mind when you hear the prompt, or whatever just turns up in your head. So the prompt that we're going to be working with, that I will be working with as an example, is I remember. And I'll explain exactly how we're going to make that work in a minute. But if you want to write about something completely different, yes, please do that. That's the thing that your poem should be about. Section 3, this is where we're going to write the sprawling, messy first draft. So what I like to do is, first of all, is set a timer for quite a short amount of time. So 5 or 6 minutes is good. And the way that I get started is you write your prompt or your idea at the top of your page. This doesn't have to be your title, it's just because blank pages can be a bit intimidating. And then you just see what comes off the end of your pen next. I'm saying pen, it doesn't have to be a pen. I tend to work on a keyboard because that works better for me. Some people like to write it on their phones. Some people write using voice recognition software. So when I say pen paper, that's a shorthand for whatever method works for you to actually get words down on the page. So you write the words, I remember, and then you just see what comes off the end of your pen next. Doesn't have to be coherent. It can be full sentences, or it can just be little fragments and little scraps. Key things to remember: do not stop to read over what you've written. We will do that next. Do not worry about whether or not it makes sense. Do not worry about your spelling, your punctuation, your grammar. These things are important in the end. They are absolutely not important at the start. And if you've ever had anybody kind of had a bad experience at school, maybe where people have, criticised your work for, bad spelling or bad punctuation or bad grammar, you're in really good company. Didn't seem to hold Emily Bronte back. Agatha Christie did absolutely fine. So don't worry about these things now. You can always fix them later. Don't worry about your handwriting as long as you can read it. In fact, just sort of generally do not worry. Okay, so for 5 or 6 minutes, just try it and see what happens. just without any sort of worry or hesitation or editing, just start writing, I remember, and just keep going until the timer goes off. So, section 4, reviewing what you've got. One of the best pieces of writing advice that I've ever been given is that your first draft does not have to be perfect, it only has to exist. So congratulations, because your first draft, like my first draft, now exists. So what we're going to do now is have a look at what we've written and just see which bits we like, which bits feel particularly true, and also have a look at how we've written it. So some things to look out for when you're looking at your first draft. Which phrases do you really like? Which bits do you think are the really important parts? Have you used any particular poetic tools without realising it? And you will almost certainly have done this, because we all do. So you might have got a couple of bits that rhyme, or a couple of bits that have a really nice rhythm, or you might have repeated a certain phrase. You might have used a particular construction, like a question. So you might have asked a number of questions in your piece. You might have a line that you really like and you think, actually, I might want to use that more than once. That's quite a powerful line. That might make a refrain. So have a look through and see what you've written. So the way that I like to do this, as I said, I tend to work on a keyboard. So this is my piece. I'm not expecting you to be able to read it. It's just to sort of show you what I tend to do. So this was based on a trip to the Driffield show, and I've sort of noticed all the dogs that were there, and I was thinking, I wonder what the show is like for a dog. So what I've got here is sort of a stream of consciousness thoughts of a dog at the Driffield show, and the things that I've gone through and picked out. There's a couple of phrases that I really liked that I seem to have used more than once, and then a lot of what I've picked out is sort of what's the personality of the dog that is sharing this poem. My dog seems to be quite passive aggressive. This dog is often saying things like, well, that doesn't seem quite fair, but never mind, I'll go with it, that's okay, that's fine, that sort of slightly weary tone of voice. The other thing that I quite like is when my dog becomes quite formal. I think a lot of sort of animal voices tend to be quite sort of, I'm dog, I know what I want, and I quite like my dog to be sort of very formal and sort of Victorian gentlemanly. So those are the things that came out for me from my first draft. As you can see, my process is basically scribble all over what I've written. Poetry isn't tidy. It's a very messy process. So that's what I went through, and those are the things that I picked out. So sort of the tone of voice of the dog, very formal, quite sort of Victorian gentlemanly. Dog possibly not having the very best day. And then the other thing that I picked out was this pivot moment when suddenly the dog's entire day transforms and becomes the best day of its life. Section 5, editing. So my best tip for editing is preserve your first draft exactly how it is and edit it in a new document or on a new page. The reason why I like to do that is because it just helps us be braver as writers. It means that you don't have that feeling of, oh my God, what if I'm not editing it? I'm just ruining it. Okay, so it's a really good tip and it works for me. So I always save my first draft exactly the way it is, and then I sort of just copy and paste onto a new page. And if you want to, you can just keep doing that with subsequent drafts. So with editing, what you're doing is you're picking out the parts that you like best as inspiration, and you're thinking about how you can use those bits and sort of sharpen up the rest of the poem so they're as good as your favourite bits. And this is where you can start to think about things like, do I want it to rhyme? Do I want it to have a particular rhythm? Is there a phrase that I want to repeat? Is a refrain? Do I want to get really fancy and try and fit it into a particular poetic form? So your first draft is the bones of what it is that you want to say. And the point of editing is to make sure that you've said it as clearly and as powerfully as possible. Now the question is, how do I know when I finished editing? And the honest answer is, I don't think any of us really know when we finished editing. Some poems are very fully formed at the first draft, and we look at them and we can think, actually, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say, and I don't want to change it. And some of our poems, my one in this example, needed a lot of polishing, because what I wanted in the end was something quite formal and quite structured, and what I produced in my first draft was just stream of consciousness. And that's okay. This stage takes as long as it takes, and it can be anywhere from 30 seconds to the heat death of the universe as a time scale. So don't feel that you need to kind of spend an amount of time. If you get something that you're happy with very quickly, that's great. And that means that it just came out right the first time. If it takes a lot of editing, that's also great, and it means that you put the time in. So there's no kind of quality control here. So the amount of time that you spend editing has got no relationship to, is this a good poem, is this a bad poem? It's just the time that it takes until you're happy. So form just means a particular set of rules that define a certain kind of poem. So some forms are very, very tightly controlled, so they might have a very, very complex rhyme scheme. They might have a very, very tightly defined rhythm, and they might have repeating words or lines. So sonnets, for example, have a very strict rhyme and rhythm form. Limericks, surprisingly difficult to write. I mean, I'm sure, I think we tend to undervalue them because they're generally meant to be funny, but I think being funny is way harder than being serious. So some forms are very tightly controlled and they have very clear rules. And some forms are very loose and very free. So blank verse just means, basically it's the form that you use to create your first draft. It's just laying it out the way that you want it to be. There's lots of forms that come in between. So there's forms like the haiku, which is a syllable counting form, the bop, which is a line counting form, the cinquain, which again is syllable counting. You can have acrostics, where the first letter of every line, spells out a word or a sentence. You can have ballads, which are very closely tied to music. And it's just really a question of which one do you feel like having a play with. There's no right or wrong answer, no one is better or worse than the other. It's just whatever speaks to you, whatever you think would be fun to play with. If you're looking for a good resource to explore some poetic forms, we'll pop a link in the description below, and it's at writersdigest.com, list of 50 poetic forms. It's a good place to start. There's lots of other places that you can look at. Playing with form can actually be good fun. A lot of people, when we're first starting out, we will look at form and think, oh my god, it's got to rhyme, it's got to have a rhythm, it's got to have a joke. Sometimes it's just fun, just the joy of showing off, look what I can do. They are tools, they're not rules. So don't feel that you haven't written a poem if you haven't chosen a particular form, and please don't ever feel that one form is better than another. Another thing that often happens, we tend to undervalue what comes to us naturally. So I've taught a lot of students who are just insanely good rhymers naturally, and they always say, oh yeah, but that's easy. And so they think it's not great. And it's such a great skill. I don't have it. I find rhyme quite hard. So if you find a form that works for you, that's not because it's easy, that's because it's the right form for you. So please don't feel that you're sort of cheating somehow if you find that you're naturally very good at rhyming, or that you naturally really like syllable counting poems. That's great, and that's the form that you should use. This is a bit that people often get quite scared about, but poetry is meant to be shared. That's what it's for. So when you've finished fitting your poem into the form that you want to use and editing it, have a think about who you can share it with and how you might want to share it. So you could read it out to somebody, you could write it out by hand and send it to them in the post. You could come along to an open mic session and you could perform it. You could record yourself reading it and you could post it to your socials. If you'd like to, you can send it to us and we will share it here on this webpage. Sharing is daunting, and we've all been there, but a couple of things to remember. Poets are nice, okay? We're nice people, we look after each other. It's not like the open mic comedy circuit where part of the process is to just get brutally torn to pieces by the audience. That doesn't happen at poetry nights, I promise you. New poets are always welcome. And generally speaking, if you share a poem with somebody and you say, this is for you, I wrote this for you, they will be so enormously touched and complimented that you chose them to share your work with. So do please feel that you can share your poetry. And as an encouragement for that, in the next section, I will share my poem, The Song of the Dog. The Song of the Dog. We've left the car. I pause to scent the breeze. Redolent odours rhapsodise my nose. I shake the journey off, then plant my toes and flex my muscles, ready to run free. Excuse me, madam, that is my paw. No, it's no problem, just please be more careful in future. Where to begin? That path of mud, that herd of animals whose scent I've yet to learn. My head's a riot. Overwhelmed, I turn in joyful circles, all my senses stirred. Oh, is my lead going on? I thought perhaps there would be no lead today, but clearly that was my mistake. Hail, fellow wanderer! Let us complete the nose-touch bum-sniff ritual of our kind, divine ancestral custom, long enshrined, that regulates our manners when we meet. Oh my goodness, apparently I need to go over there now so my human can talk to that other human. Please forgive me for rushing off so rudely. I am so sorry. This patch of land seems dull to me, but what do I know? I am just a dog. I wait, and in my head I keep a log of grudges. My feet hurt. I'm bored. It's hot. Just so I have this clear, you were saying you can greet fellow members of your species in accordance with the manners of your kind, but I cannot greet fellow members of my species in accordance with the manners of my kind. That's definitely your position, is it? Okay, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I was just checking. Disconsolate, I walk to heel. I beg, but begging gets me nowhere. No one cares to hear a dog complain. These thoroughfares are crammed with torsos, bags, and legs. Wait. What is that? Did I complain? Was I dissatisfied with being brought here? Did I dare to say I'd had enough? This is a glorious day. My heart is full, my soul is gratified. This miserable experience grows sweet, and I will bless this place for evermore. The gods have smiled upon me. I am replete, for I have found a sausage on the floor.